Today I'm going to be making this creature from Icelandic folklore called a Yule Cat. So this is the image that inspired me, and I thought, why not make it in 3D? So, spoiler alert, that's what I'm going to do. So for those who are Blender users, I've created a custom startup setup so I can have all the textures and everything pre-configured, so I can just dive straight into doing the modeling. So first things first, I'll set up a mirror modifier and bring in my reference. And the mirror modifier means I only need to make one side of the model, and it makes the other side obviously mirrored across, so it saves a lot of time. Most things are symmetrical for the most part when you're modeling, whether it be humans or animals, so it saves quite a bit of time using that feature. You can always edit things after the fact, like when you're sculpting and stuff, but it's always helpful when you're first starting out to keep things simple. So on the whole, I'll always keep things mirrored. While most Blender users will, upon entering the program, delete the default cube, it seemed a good idea here to not delete it and instead model everything out of the cube, just to make things extra hard. So at this stage I'm just roughly blocking out the cat, adding the body shape and the head shape, and really basically marking out where the fur colours are going to be, so the light coloured fur on the belly, then the darker brown fur on the head and the back. So the first thing I would do is typically mock things up with some basic shapes for things like the eyes and the mouth and whatever else, to then get an idea of proportions and everything else, and then from there I can refine it, add some more detail, and then work from there. So skipping ahead, with the eyes and the nose in place, now I'm going to start to block out the shape of the face, building from the outlines around to then build out the sphere, and then sort of get everything lining up and connected. So with the basic head shape modelled out, I can start adding in more detail for things like the mouth and stuff to make it look more like the drawing, and take some artistic liberties because it is an illustration. So yeah, trying to make it look as close as possible to the illustration while also making it work in 3D. The mouth in particular was one of the challenging parts because the illustration shows it quite flat, but to make the teeth poke out, I had to give the cat a bit of underbite to then allow the teeth to sort of show through. So, and in order to do the outlines, and in this style, I'm cutting sort of smaller polygons to then colour in black, to then give that sort of illustrated line look. So the top of the head was another part that was quite challenging to put together, just trying to figure out how to make those ears blend in to a sort of domed surface. And then again with the artistic liberty, just adding in some quick eyebrows and stuff to then make the cat have a bit more character. So to create the stripes on the cat, I'm creating extra polygons and then colouring those in a slightly different brown to then give the stripes, rather than doing the traditional thing of adding a texture over the top. So at the end of the first day, it's not perfect, but it's close enough for me. I'm not one to, I don't have that kind of skill to match things perfectly, but I think it captures the spirit, at least of the original illustration. The the face is pretty close. And again, I've tried to add in that sort of underbite and everything else. So yeah, that's so now all that remains is to build all the scenery, the people, the candle on the head, the lighting, the body, the tail, everything else. So it's day 2 and it's time to start modelling out the rest of the scene. So right now all I have is essentially a bean with a very detailed cat head on it. So the first order of play is to actually add some limbs and perhaps a tail, and foreshadowing a lot of work that's going to be down the line. I first model these as part of the body, which would be the logical thing to do, given I'm not going to be posing this or animating this at all. But I didn't do that, so that's a problem for future me. So with the cats half done, it seemed like the perfect time to start modelling out the entirety of the environment. So I start by adding a plane, scaling up, and then starting to build out a pine tree as accurately to the illustration as I possibly can. And because I don't like to make things easy, I'm modelling it from a cube. And you're probably thinking, why didn't you just make it from a cylinder in the first place? What are you doing? I don't know. I just don't know. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Also, doing things the hard way, I decided rather than doing geometry nodes, which would have been a lot easier, or hair, or any other way, I thought it'd be a great idea to manually scatter, scale, rotate, and randomize 50, 60, 100 of these pine trees manually, because why not? So also doing things the hard way, I decided to subdivide the ground plane and manually tweak the individual vertices into an approximation of a low poly mountain, rather than using built-in tools that do things like height maps with terrain and everything else. So nothing beats doing things the long, arduous, manual way. At least it makes a good time lapse, I suppose, because you can see every single individual manual tweak of every single vertex. So to keep the sort of low detail aesthetic, the sky is simply a plane with stripes on it, and then sort of set with a emission material so that it sort of glows in the background, and it didn't have to sort of fanny around with skyboxes and all that kind of stuff. What? Get off. So after an hour of getting distracted with trees, I actually went back to finishing the cat. Get off. When I say finishing, what I mean is messing around for another hour or two with shaders and noise maps and all kinds of random stuff, and rendering it, and not actually finishing the model, but it's... yes. I guess there's a method somewhere. So finally, the last elements to be modelled, beginning with the candle. So starting with a cube again, as usual, and slowly adding more detail to then give that sort of drippy melted wax effect. I'm just selecting random faces, extruding out, and then softening up the outlines to make it look more melty. So since I'm going to add a different shader on the candle to have a subsurface element to it to mimic the look of wax, I'm adding more geometry here, even though it's not strictly necessary in terms of the outline. What it does is it just creates a bit more detail for the subsurface scatter, I think, to work on. At least for Eevee, which is what I was originally intending to use as the render engine. but I think finally I used a cycle. So anyway, so my original idea was to make the flame simulated or make it 3D, but to keep with the aesthetic I decided just to use a single plane and make the flame 2D, and it is just simply polygons on a plane arranged to do the same sort of stylistic flame shape. And then finally with adding an emission shader to make it really glow in the renders. So here you can see the subsurface scattering in action. This is with the Eevee renderer, and that gives it that kind of nice, that semi-transparent look on the candle. It was at this point I decided I'd start playing with geometry nodes, trying to simulate sort of polygonal fur. I did thankfully give up on that and started modelling a tail instead. Another quick test render just to see how things look, and they're looking better. It's a big cat, look!
Why is that cat so huge?
Because he's a Yule Cat.
But is it bigger than a monster?
Yeah, it depends how big the monster is.
I think that cat has laser eyes.
Yeah.
Does it have laser eyes?
It might do.
He looks really evil.
Does he?
Yeah. What is that red thing on the top of his head?
The candle.
Why is there a candle on his head?
Because he's the Yule Cat.
What? Will he take it off?
No.
Why?
Because he's a cat that has a candle in his head. So it's day 3, and we've arrived at that point I said we would earlier, where the legs now need to be incorporated into the body with a completely different edge flow and topology. And this is the rod I'd made from my back earlier. So the what's the word? It's come back to bite me in the posterior. So I'm just removing half the faces from the legs and cutting a big hole in the body, and then piece by piece joining them up edge to edge until everything flows together nicely and they look like they're part of the body. Between the shader, the colour and the shape, it does resemble somewhat the Christmas turkey. Now I'm hungry. So one final thing to add is the bodies underneath the cat's feet. So this is really very roughly box model. So this is the most appalling model I think I've ever made. But since it's only going to be stamped into the snow anyway, you won't really see a lot of this detail. But yeah, the myth goes that the Yule Cat punishes you for not having fancy clothes on Christmas Eve. And I don't know why, but that's the mythology. Go look it up on Wikipedia and maybe comment why that is. Why you get trampled to death by a giant cat in Iceland if you haven't got fancy clothes on Christmas Eve. I would be curious to know why, or what the yes. But anyway, that's the Yule Cat, start to finish. And so here you go. That is the final article, I think. So here we have the final render. So we have our turkey-legged cat, a curly tail, lots of trees, dead people all over the floor. I've kept it PG by not including the blood from the original. It's just mashing that person into the ground. I did forget to include the modelling of the bell, but that's just a series of I think I did make it from a cube, and just on top of this swatch based palette, all I've done is just add a Fresnel, this very subtle Fresnel effect on the edge to make the roughness slightly lower so it's shinier on the edges, just like in real life. And then I've just added a very subtle normal map just to give a bit of texture to the objects in a consistent way, using the object texture coordinates so they're all a consistent scale. That's the Yule Cat. If I render him out, yeah, in the forest, mashing people up. So yeah, hope you enjoyed that in-depth look at how things can be modelled in Blender. I'm sure there's better ways of doing most of the stuff I've done, but yeah, hopefully that was interesting to you. So yeah.